Hey everyone, glad you're here. Tonight we've got a collection of disturbing Reddit stories that are guaranteed to give you chills. Whether you're winding down for the night, working, or just looking for a scare, this is the perfect background listen. Dim the lights, get cozy, and let's dive right in. I was paid $50K to dine with a stranger. I was broke as shit. Flatlined financially, emotionally, existentially. Whether by poor choices in my youth or plain old shit luck, life spat me out straight from high school and onto the streets. Drugs followed, rehab, then relapse. I drifted from couches to shelters to squatting in abandoned homes. Steady income, never heard of it. So when I saw the email, I almost deleted it without reading. I figured it was just another rejection for one of my poorly written job applications until the header caught my attention. Dinner with me for $50,000. I'm not exactly attractive. Even before addiction wrecked the few good features I had, I didn't have much going for me. My eyes had sunk into my skull like they wanted to disappear. My skin had forgotten what hydration felt like, so this email, ridiculous. I had no looks, no resume, no justification for being chosen. But I just left a shelter, and 50 grand was a dream bigger than anything I'd ever held. So I read on. It was from a domain I'd never seen before, Shepard Get S and K Compunction Firm, com. The message read, "Dear recipient, I trust this message finds you well. I invite you to join me for dinner at, this is not a romantic offer. You will be compensated handsomely for your time, provided you adhere to the following terms. Remain for the full meal until I pay the bill and escort you out. Do not pay for anything yourself. Wear formal attire. If you don't own a suit, one will be provided at the entrance. It will fit. Any breach will void all compensation. To accept, reply. A time and date will be sent. To decline, disregard this message." Did it seem insane? Absolutely. But desperation makes fools of us all. The kind of fool that doesn't ask for explanation, just a fork and a seat. So I replied, "Hello, Shepard, thank you for your generous offer. I accept your terms and will be there. May I ask a few questions about this proposition? Again, thank you." I didn't expect a response. Maybe a phishing scam, maybe nothing. But seconds later, a reply came, Monday at 6 p.m. at, "Questions may be asked at dinner. Thank you for your cooperation." More cryptic bullshit. That's when I gained the smallest amount of common sense and decided to look into whoever this guy was. This was clearly his business email, so I Googled the domain, S and K Compunction Firm. I was expecting some big group of lawyers off the name alone, but nope. No law firm, just a single office tucked in a strip mall, no products. No services, just a photo of the branch manager, despite the fact that the office barely looked big enough for two people and the title implied multiple locations, yet I couldn't even find a second one. What did they do? Solutions, no specifics, just that one word. I thought about backing out, probably should've, but when you've got nothing left, hesitance starts looking like a luxury. I had nothing to lose, so I took the chance. Between drug-fueled stupors and getting my ass kicked once or twice, Monday crept up on me like bruises do, slow, unseen, then sudden. I didn't have anything formal, so I threw on the only white button-up shirt I owned and some gray slacks. Both had stains I couldn't explain, and no iron had graced their surface in years. Still, they were the fanciest clothes I had. None of it mattered. The second I hobbled into the restaurant, the greeter, if you could even call them that, handed me a dry-cleaned suit without a word and pointed to the bathrooms. I took the hint. This suit seemed expensive, real men's warehouse-type shit. It fit perfectly, just like the email said. Too perfectly, actually. The cuffs landed exactly at my wrist bone, the collar rested like it knew my neck's shape already. I didn't have the time or money to question it, I walked back out. The place had a strange charm. Soft lighting spilled across tablecloths in smooth pools of warmth. Ornate picture frames lined the walls, filled with abstract paintings that felt a bit too familiar. Wood trim hugged every surface. Big, glittery curtains hung heavy like a wedding reception. It smelled like artificial plants and faded fabric. Soft jazz floated through the air and brushed against my ears. As I scanned the room, I realized something unsettling. When I first walked in, there were at least 4 tables of people laughing and enjoying themselves. It had been noisy and lively. But now, silent, empty, like a bell had rung that only I hadn't heard. Just a few bartenders, the mute greeter, and one bald man in a suit eerily similar to mine. I already knew who he was. His photo was the only thing of note I'd found when looking up the domain. The branch manager. I approached his table, and before I could ask if he was expecting me, he gestured to the chair across from him. He was an older man, maybe 50, with sad, droopy eyes. His nose was so thin and pointy it looked like a shark's fin. He seemed to have no nostrils at all. His jowls fluttered slightly as he spoke in a soft, low tone. "Thank you for coming, young man. It's good to finally see you," he said, extending an arm for a handshake. I tried my best to sound steady and firm, despite my rising anxiety. Thank you, sir." The conversation that followed was surprisingly pleasant. The food was better than almost anything I had ever had, decadent and strangely nostalgic, as if it had been made just for me. He asked about my childhood, my current working conditions, and my family life. Most of these memories weren't pleasant, but it felt good to have someone simply listen. I reached a point where I started letting my guard down. He never interrupted, never judged, just watched. Then he got serious. He grabbed my wrist just as I lifted my fork. His grip was ice cold but steady, and his tone dropped. "What is something you wish you had never done?" "What?" I was shocked by his sudden seriousness. He didn't respond, he just stared, still and waiting. I swallowed. "I stole from my mom when she was dying. I was supposed to take care of her and protect her, but I spent her money on the stuff she told me to quit." A waitress appeared silently, depositing a small porcelain bowl before me. Inside sat a single seared scallop resting on a streak of bright red pepper coulis, its color staining the white plate like the shame I carried. The scallop's tender flesh gave way to a flash of heat, a reminder that some wounds never fully heal. A whisper of lemon zest lifted the flavors. He nodded, no judgment in his eyes, only something quietly accepting, then stood and excused himself to the restroom. As he left, I took a breath and tried to shake off the moment. Then I noticed it. The chandelier above us had one more bulb, just one. The light it cast bent slightly at the edges, stretching the shadows under our plates. I blinked, rubbed my eyes. Back to normal, mostly. The jazz had slowed by a fraction, notes now lingered a second longer than they should. He returned, looking subtly altered. His right side appeared younger and tighter, the left side remained unchanged. A crease near his mouth had vanished, and his smile felt less weighted. He asked again, gently, "What's the kindest thing you've ever done?" I told him about a homeless kid I had let sleep in my car on a freezing night. I didn't know his name and didn't want anything from him. I just locked the doors and stayed up until morning in case someone tried anything. While his gaze lingered, another course arrived. A hollowed apple cradled a warm butternut squash soup, its sweetness tempered by sage oil. The apple's crisp rim framed the velvety broth, echoing the way I had sheltered that boy from the cold. Each spoonful felt like a soft promise of safety in a world so devoid of it. This time, as he listened, something in his face responded. His left eye seemed brighter and the left side softened. He looked younger somehow. Maybe the light was playing tricks, or maybe the room had grown darker. He asked another question. "What's the worst lie you've ever told?" I hesitated. I had promised myself I would never recall this memory, yet I felt compelled to tell the old man. When someone close to me overdosed, I could have saved them. I saw them but was frozen in fear, thinking I could be just like them. When the police came, I told them he was already dead when I got there. He nodded again, still no judgment, just listening. I'm not sure how, but as I spoke, a new course appeared. A translucent steamed dumpling sat alone, its skin almost too delicate to touch. The moment I pierced it, a smoky chili broth gushed out, scorching my tongue with the sting of my lies. The gentle wrapper dissolved into nothing, leaving only the burn of a secret I thought I'd buried permanently. Then he stood and walked away, slower this time. His chair creaked slightly as he rose, and the floor beneath it curved outward in a way that made no physical sense. As I waited, I saw the wallpaper behind the bar begin to bubble faintly, like heat was pressing against it from inside. The curtains seemed heavier. The picture frames on the wall had begun to tilt, each at a different angle. Not much, but enough to notice. Enough to make you wonder. The waitstaff didn't change plates. The glasses refilled themselves. And I started noticing something impossible. Everyone in the room had his face, not exactly but similar, like a family of clones degraded with each repetition. The bartender blinked with one bulging eye, and the hostess's smile sagged like melting wax. When he came back, the distortion had grown wider. His jaw was uneven, one side shriveled, the other taut as barbed wire. The contrast on his face was more than physical now, it radiated something deeper. Like halves of a personality that couldn't agree. He sat, eyes scanning me as if measuring the weight behind my silence. I wasn't sure if he was evaluating my soul or just admiring the way panic settled into the corners of my posture. His voice arrived softly, almost reverent. "What memory do you miss the most?" It took me a moment, not because I didn't know, but because I was afraid to admit how fragile the truth had become. "I used to swim in Lake Michigan every summer," I said slowly. "With friends, we'd throw ourselves off docks and scream about sea monsters and cold sandwiches. It was stupid. But I felt safe, like I didn't owe anything to anyone." Shepard's good eye glistened. A tear formed and trailed down the brighter side of his face. It lingered at his chin and disappeared into the folds. The darker side remained unflinching, its socket almost hollow now. I stared at him, unsure whether to thank him or run. He didn't speak. He just stood, his movements slower this time, calculated, weighty. The chair creaked like it hated being left alone. This bathroom break felt longer. The silence thickened, and the music was barely audible. The overhead lights dimmed again, and this time they pulsed faintly. One of the picture frames fell sideways. The bartender wiped the same spot over and over, face devoid of emotion, eye bulging slightly. The wallpaper near the entrance was peeling, tiny tendrils reaching outward like roots. A fly circled the wine glass beside my plate but never landed, looping endlessly. I felt my chest tighten. Shepard returned. This time he didn't sit, he loomed. His face was wrong. The symmetry had given up. One eye bulged fully, twitching in quick spasms, the other was practically sunken. His mouth hung slightly open, but no breath escaped. He said nothing for several seconds, just watched me. Then finally, "Would you like dessert?" I stood, almost instinctively. "I think I need the bathroom," I said. He nodded slowly. "Take your time." The restroom was too quiet, the mirror too clear. I leaned forward, expecting to see my own ruin reflected, but instead, behind me in the mirror, Shepard waited. Not in the room, but in the reflection. His body was stretched, taller than before, suit shimmering like the surface of a pond. He smiled, both eyes twitching violently. I didn't scream or move. I just stepped back out numb. The dining room was nearly gone. The walls had peeled upward toward the ceiling. Tables melted into spiraled masses of dark wood and cloth. The floor rippled like liquid stone. The curtains had vanished entirely, leaving a strange static haze where windows had once been. Shepard stood at the center, calm. "You've done well, young man," he said. "Repentance is never easy. The hardest part is accepting that you are no longer part of the world you knew." My knees threatened to give out. I wanted to argue, to scream, to run, but nothing in my body responded the way it used to. Everything had slowed except him. "What do you mean?" I managed to ask. He smiled gently, like a father comforting a child who had just asked the final, fated question. "This meal," he said, "is not payment, it's passage." "No," I whispered. "I walked here." "I remember the shelter, the email." "You remember the drug," he said, cutting gently across my denial. "And the stall in the diner. You remember how cold the tile was. You remember how long it took for someone to find you." I shook my head as if it might rattle the truth loose, but it didn't help. My legs wouldn't move. "All we offer," he continued, "is a moment. One last conversation, one last taste, one last confession." The last of the room flaked away like ash in the wind. The table in front of us dissolved into nothing. Steam hissed upward from cracks in the floor that hadn't been there seconds before. Shepard extended his hand again. The suit he wore shimmered strangely, colors shifting like moonlight on ocean currents. Patterns swirled across the threads, faces, maybe, or shadows. I couldn't be sure. You did well, he said quietly. You were honest. That's all we ask. I felt tears on my cheek, though I didn't know how they got there. What happens now? Shepard looked over his shoulder. Behind him, the restaurant was finally gone. In its place, a hallway of shifting doors, some open, some pulsing with warm light, others dimmed and sealed. Now, he said, you choose. When I was 13, I went hunting for an urban legend. I found something much worse. I grew up in the exurbs of western Louisiana. Our small town was deeply religious, and this coupled with the crime wave of the 1980s meant that my childhood was spent largely cooped up inside. The first lick at freedom I got was Halloween night, 1987. I was 13 and was allowed out until midnight with a group of my closest friends. What really sold my mother on the idea was Patrick. Patrick was the 17-year-old brother of my best friend, Marv. Despite being feared by anyone younger than him, he was a good student and a good Christian, and all the adults he knew would fawn over him. Against his own will, he'd be accompanying our little group for the night. It was in Marv's family's basement that we watched the first half of Friday the 13th, part Roman 6 on grainy VHS. Looking back, I'm sure I thought in the moment that that movie would be the most traumatizing thing I'd see all night. When Patrick entered the room, our laughter died mid-sentence. He wasn't tall, but carried himself like he was. I never liked him, but knew that not even his presence could bring down my mood tonight. After Marv's parents forced us out, we patrolled the neighborhood trick or treating. I think there were about 5 or 6 of us, not including Patrick. I knew all the other kids from either church or school, apart from Lenny, the kid brother of my friend Rob. I never knew, but I'm sure he was only around 7 or 8. I did remember that he was dressed in a clown costume. Apart from Lenny, the only other costumes I could remember were mine and Marv's. We both came dressed as Ghostbusters, and I'd brought an old black-painted vacuum cleaner with me to really make it. It was after 10, after the trick-or-treating, that maybe 1 or 2 of us left the group to go back home. We all were giggling and messing around, high on sugar, not noticing that Patrick was leading us a little further away from the rows of white houses. The streetlights grew sparse, then vanished altogether. The laughter that had carried us through the night faltered, replaced by the crunch of dead leaves underfoot and the distant, rhythmic croak of bullfrogs. The air thickened with the smell of stagnant water and rotting vegetation. I remember Marv nudging me, his grin faltering for the first time that night. "Dude," he whispered, "where the hell is he taking us?" There was a small marshy clearing on the banks of the bayou. Large, thick roots served as makeshift benches, which Patrick directed us onto. Confused, we sat in a crescent around him and watched in terror as he took a cigarette from his pocket, lit the end, and took a draw. He blew smoke into Marv's face and started to talk. He told us all that he had a story he wanted to share, a local legend that every kid in town should be aware of. We listened intently as he began telling us about Leatherskin. The story will always stick with me, and I will now try to repeat it as accurately as I can. I might miss out some of the details. It has been 38 years after all, but this will be the truest account of the original myth on the internet. As far as I know, anyway. Leatherskin was born sometime in the late 40s or early 50s. Deformed, coarse brown calluses grew all over his body like spreading mycelium. His pus-colored eyes were nothing but tiny pinpricks, and the full set of teeth he was born with were too sharp to be breastfed. His father, the town's pastor, was terrified that his child was a satanic aberration, punishment for the sins of his youth. Despite his ailing wife's pleas, the pastor took his newborn to a murky corner of the swamp and left him in a patch of moss to die. By this point, Patrick had already piqued my interest. At 13, I'd already heard the name Leatherskin whispered before. I heard it from a kid in the playground when I was much younger, in the context that he was going to get me. It was a small part of local lore that I honestly knew nothing about. I didn't even know what Leatherskin was supposed to look like. On that Halloween night, I was ecstatic at the idea of finally getting to know. Unbeknownst to the pastor, he left his unwanted infant crying within earshot of a dilapidated shotgun house. The wooden shaking, that was slowly sinking into the bayou, was inhabited by an aged and dementia-ridden woman. She wandered from her home and followed the cries to that little patch of moss. When she found the baby, she took him in her arms and cradled him to silence. That night, she brought him back with her and raised him as her own. For years, she fed and clothed him, cared for and nurtured him, and did her best to keep him from harm's way. The senile old woman was barely able to speak herself, and, with no other human contact, Leatherskin grew up without a proficiency in any language. His diet consisted of raw seabird and other hapless swamp creatures until he reached puberty. By 13, Leatherskin was already almost 7 feet tall and had just begun to sneak out of his mother's home and into the small town on the other side of the overgrowth. He'd stalk through the backyards at night and kidnap family pets under the cover of darkness. This became his new routine, but as Leatherskin grew, so did his hunger. Sometime in the mid-1960s, a small girl wandered out into the swamp, chasing a monarch butterfly. She was never seen again. From this point onwards, all sympathy had drained from Leatherskin's story. After his first feed on children's flesh, he could not go back. Kids began disappearing at a rate far higher than the national average. After the discovery of some semblance of human remains, the townsfolk would propound that these poor children were falling victim to alligator attacks. Hunts began soon after, and although many reptiles were killed, Leatherskin remained out of sight. The parents, however, stopped letting their children play outside, and especially not near the bayou. Leatherskin was forced to venture further into the small village, and even broke into houses from time to time. It was after one of the Calloway twins disappeared from the edge of the schoolyard that people stopped saying "gators" and started to nail their windows shut instead. By this time, he had begun to spend much of his time in the water, clambering from root to root in the murky shallows. Anyone who did encounter him might have mistaken Leatherskin for a floating log or even a crocodilian. Few would have realized how close to death they'd come. Some hunters might have even seen the rundown cabin Leatherskin called home. It rested half-sunken where the marshland met the slow-running waters of the bayou. It was built by the father of Leatherskin's elderly adoptive mother, sometime in the 1870s or 80s, I'd reckon. Back then, where it stood was dry land perched on a small riverbank. With more attraction, it could have developed into a township, taking the place of the one I called home a mile northwards. Shortly after the end of segregation, and immediately after Governor Wallace's loss in the 1968 presidential election, racial tensions in the state of Louisiana were at a fever pitch. Following more sightings, and even a blurry photograph of Leatherskin, the highly fantasized story the local newspapers ran with were of a Creole cannibal living deep within the swamp. A racist mob was whipped up, and in one warm July night, they descended into the quagmire, accompanied by the sheriff's men. By foot and by boat, the crowd came across Leatherskin's decaying house. Raiding it, they found only the senile octogenarian who'd raised the young demon. She was alive, but unresponsive, as she had been for the past 2 years. In that time, she'd been kept alive, fed and bathed by her de jure offspring. The gang of men soon realized she wasn't the sole occupant of the house, however, as the wooden frames weren't the only things rotting away. Led into the cramped upstairs by stench alone, they found piles of small bodies, most picked down to the bone. In the ensuing interrogation, the old woman sadly died. This was the beginning of the account from the sole survivor of that night's events, once he regained speech a few days after. He told the reporters encamped around his hospital bed that shortly after, the door was ripped from its hinges. A blur entered the shack and tore the group of men apart, shrugging off gunfire like a metal drum as he did. The lone survivor, a teenaged clerk from Rubio's Hardware, had only done so by leaping out of a brittle, mildew-frosted window. Leaving the screams behind him, he ran, coated in blood, through the maze of vines. In a panic, he twisted his ankle and crawled onto a mossy clearing lit by the moonlight. Eventually, he was found by one of the police boats used in the search, piloted by a bewildered deputy, and taken back into town. When a second search party came across the old cabin, they found what was left of the group of men. They were gored to pieces, strewn everywhere. The townsfolk burned the house, and as it went up in flames, its ancient foundations finally gave way and it slid into the murky water. No one knew what happened to Leatherskin, but to this day, our little town still has one of the highest disappearance rates in the contiguous United States. Some say Leatherskin is still alive and well, thriving in the swamp, still feeding on children. At least, this was the story told to us by Patrick. Once Patrick finished his yarn, he looked around at the group of kids in front of him, gauging our belief or a lack thereof. To my side, little Lenny was quivering in his clown costume, his eyes darting around the mangroves. I was conflicted on its validity, but I can remember that with the passion the story was told, I felt inclined to believe him. If I had fully believed him, I might have been less enthusiastic when Patrick quickly suggested that we should all go into the swamp and hunt for Leatherskin ourselves. Since I watched Stand By Me, I yearned for the freedom I had seen in media. With an hour to midnight, I leapt from my seat on the root and fervently supported Patrick's plan. He threw his arm around my shoulder and spoke to the rest of the children, goading them to follow my example. I started to wish that I kept my mouth shut, because 5 minutes later, our little posse was trudging through the swamp. One or two decided not to come with us, instead following the trail back the way we came and into town. A few of us had flashlights, given to us by our overprotective parents. That, combined with the brief cracks of moonlight, gazing through the canopy guided our path. We stuck to the elevated and dry sods of earth as best we could. Despite my attempts, I could feel the hanging ends of my pant leg dampen. Marv and I tried to hang back, and we talked and laughed like a pair of hyenas. The air was wet with sound, cicadas, toads, and the flow of the nearby bayou. Suddenly, Patrick put a commanding hand up and told us all to stop. We did and looked around, trying to find what sparked our sudden halt. Patrick turned to us with a sinister smile and said that he'd seen movement along the banks of the creek. "It's Leatherskin," I remember Patrick shouting at us. Lenny's breath hitched as his older brother pushed him forward. Patrick saw what the siblings were doing and decided to take it further. He said something along the lines of, "You're the youngest. Leatherskin will want you." With that, we all started chanting, pressuring the kid to take a few more steps towards the water's edge. Clearly terrified, but even more afraid of what a group of older boys could do to him, he did. In his little white clown suit, with blue and red polka dots, he took a series of anxious steps forward as we roared around him. Joking, I shouted, "Oh my God, is that Leatherskin?" Lenny whirled around, almost losing his balance and falling backwards into the water. Tears were streaking down his white face paint now. "Stop it, guys, you're not funny," he screamed as we all bent double, laughing at him. Those words are etched into my mind because they were his last. A torrent of water swept onto the thin, stony bank as a great weight slammed into Lenny, having bitten onto his submerged ankles. He cried out in pain and shock and fell to hands and knees as he was dragged backwards. I was paralyzed with fear, as were Patrick and Marv, but Lenny's brother rushed forward to fight off the black shape. It wasn't until he splashed into the water that we snapped out of our trance of regret and ran to Rob's side. He grabbed him and stopped him from running fully into the bayou as Lenny was dragged underwater by what we came to realize was an alligator. We all stood, soaking and staring at the carnage before us. The beast had begun to death roll, and Lenny's screams came in cycles and he repeatedly breached and was then dragged under the water. Those same screams still rattle away in my nightmares whenever my mind dares to dream. His dying breath was carried as a bubble to the black water's surface. Within a minute, maybe less, the white froth brought up by the thrashing had dissipated. Our collective gaze followed the disturbance in the water as it slowly moved away, off towards the tangle of mangroves. Rob fell to his knees by my side and sobbed gently into his hands. I heard Patrick gulp and turned to watch him wordlessly walk away from us, back in the direction of the trail. Marv and I helped Rob to his unsteady feet and followed Patrick. As soon as we caught up to him, he whipped around and furiously warned us not to tell a soul what had happened tonight. I was inclined to follow his advice, as was Marv, but we both knew Rob couldn't. Patrick sighed and took Rob by his forearm and led him away from us. I looked at Marv confused, but he just shrugged. A small while later, the two returned. Rob was crying with even more devastation now, and Patrick just sniffed indifferently. When I returned home that night, just 15 minutes past midnight, my mother immediately knew something was wrong. Despite her persistence, I explained to her that I was blackout tired, and as it was over 3 hours past my bedtime, she let me go to sleep as soon as I came through the door. I cried for most of the night and stayed awake long enough to hear sirens wailing from, I assumed, Rob's house. In the morning, my mother came into my room and quietly sat on my bed. She told me, in a soft and distant voice, that Lenny, the little brother of my friend Rob, had been reported missing. She then asked me if I knew anything about it. I told her in a shaky voice that I didn't, and my reply was followed by a few minutes of silence. My mother then leaned in and hugged me. I started to cry into her shoulder, and after some point, she pulled away, gave me a shallow smile, and left my room. They never found Lenny, of course, nor did they find his remains. I didn't see Rob much after that night, but I often heard from my parents that Lenny's mother and father had shattered. I stayed friends with Marv until I moved to Baton Rouge at 19. I rarely visited my hometown, but recently, my mother passed away. I haven't spoken to her in years, let alone seen her in person. The funeral was organized by my sister, who now lived in the family home with her own family. I stayed with her for a week or two during the mourning period and got to know my nieces and nephews properly for the first time. A few days ago, I was browsing around a local shop, one I worked at in the summer of 1990. It hadn't changed much, and I realized the new owner was an old school friend of mine. I was walking down aisle 3 when I bumped into him. I almost didn't recognize him at first, but he recognized me. It was Rob. Guilt still clung to him like kudzu. I could tell it in his gray eyes and broken smile. His hands trembled as he restocked a shelf of canned goods, his wedding ring loose on his thinning fingers. He somehow seemed smaller than he was when we were 13. We talked and vowed to talk more again one day, then said our goodbyes. I'm still not sure how much detail he told his parents of what happened that night, or if he's ever made peace with his own conscience. This post is my own admission. I'm not sure if the stories of Leatherskin are true. I did, however, tell them to my young nieces and nephews in the hope they'll never venture near the swamp. Alligators infest these waters, and I'm certain it was one of those beasts that killed Lenny that night. I mean, what else could it be? I live in a town where kids disappear at night. Flintridge is the kind of place you don't find unless you're already lost. We don't have a website, no social media presence, no highway billboards saying, "Visit beautiful Flintridge," with pictures of waterfalls or smiling families. If you ever do find yourself here, it's because something brought you, something pulled you. I was born here, and I've tried to leave more times than I can count. I always come back. Sometimes I wake up in my bed without even knowing how, but this isn't about me. It's about what happens when the sun goes down. I was 16 when I first saw it happen. At the time, there were whispers, always whispers, but nothing you could point to. Just things the older folks muttered at church, or the librarian slipped between sentences like they didn't mean anything. Things like, never walk home after dark. Always check the windows are locked before 9. Don't answer if someone knocks after midnight. The first rule they teach you as a kid, don't go outside after sunset, ever. But I was 16, and I was in love. Her name was Marnie. She was new, moved here with her mom after what she called a bad year, but she never told me more than that. She was sharp-eyed and wild in the way city girls are when they first move to the country. She said this place felt fake, too quiet. We used to sneak out to the old train tracks. She'd bring her dad's cigarettes and a Polaroid camera, and we'd talk about music and death and dreams and pretend we weren't trapped. That night, we lost track of time. The sky went orange, then pink, then dark. I didn't notice until she said, "What time is it?" I looked at my phone. 8:52. My stomach dropped. We ran. We were only 5 blocks from her house, maybe 3 minutes if we sprinted. But the second we turned the corner onto Sycamore Street, I felt it. The air changed, thicker, quieter, like the world had swallowed its breath. The street was empty. No headlights, no porch lights. Just us and the dark. Marnie whispered, "Something's wrong." I didn't answer. Because I saw something standing at the end of the street, not someone. Something, it was tall, easily over 8 feet, thin. Its arms hung low, past its knees. Its head was crooked, like its neck had too many joints. And it was watching us. By some reason, the name Peter came to mind while watching it. We ran again. Harder, faster. Marnie was in front. I remember that detail because I saw it lunge from the side street. I never even heard it. 1 second, she was running. The next, she was gone. Like she was plucked from the air. No scream, no sound. Just nothing. I didn't stop. I don't even remember running all the way home. I just remember slamming the front door, locking every bolt, and sinking to the kitchen floor while my mother stood frozen at the sink. Her first words. "Not what happened, not where S. Marnie," she just said. "You were lucky. Peter often goes for girls first." I asked what she meant by that and where Peter had taken Marnie, and she just said, "They're getting married." Marnie was never found. No search parties. No missing posters. Her mother claimed she ran away. The cops didn't even file a report. I asked her mom once weeks later what she really thought. She just looked at me and said, "You weren't supposed to see that. They don't like being seen." After that night, things changed. I started noticing patterns. For example, every month on the 13th, someone new would disappear. Always at night, always quietly. Sometimes it was a kid. Sometimes a teacher. Once the mayor, never any bodies. No blood, just gone. We don't have a cemetery in Flintridge. Never needed one. The dead don't stay, the missing don't return. I confronted my dad once. He was drunk, slurring, angry, emotional, perfect timing. I asked, "Why don't people leave this place?" He stared at me a long time. Then said, "Because it follows. You can't run from something that lives in silence." When I pressed him further, he told me about a town meeting he went to in the 80s. Said it wasn't a real meeting, not the kind with minutes and coffee. It was a deal, a negotiation. The townspeople had been desperate. Children were vanishing. People were losing their minds. And one night, the lights in the entire town blinked out for exactly 7 seconds. When they came back on, there was a figure in the center of the town square. No face, no voice. Just a tall shape in black, standing so still it looked like part of the statue. My father said everyone heard the same message, not aloud, but inside. "Give me what you can spare, and I will let the rest stay." Ever since then, the rules were followed. The disappearances were accepted. No police. No outsiders, just tribute. I've tried leaving 3 times. The first time, my car broke down 20 miles out. I woke up the next morning in my bed. The second time, I made it all the way to a motel 2 towns over. That night, I dreamed of Marnie. She was standing in my hallway, mouthing something I couldn't hear. I woke up back home, nose bleeding, door locked from the inside. The third time, I didn't even try. I just packed a bag and walked. I got as far as the edge of the forest before I heard it. A knock, 3 of them on a tree. When I turned, it was there, watching. It had no eyes, but I felt it staring. I dropped the bag and walked home. I don't know why I'm writing this. No one will believe me. You'll think this is just another creepy story on the internet. But if you're reading this and you find yourself passing through a small town with no streetlights, no billboards, and houses with curtains drawn tight even during the day, please find me. I want to get out of here, but if nighttime arrives while you're here, either fall asleep or run. Because Flintridge isn't a town, it's a trap, a mouth waiting to close. And once night falls, it feeds. Thanks for hanging out and listening to these chilling stories. All the sources are linked in the description if you want to check them out yourself. If you enjoyed the video, a like really helps out the channel, and I'd love to hear which story creeped you out the most in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss the next round of scares. Until then, stay safe.